The British Empire stood at the height of its power under Queen Victoria. Streets were lit, schools were built, the population swelled. Progress was visible everywhere, almost everywhere. In the heart of Spitalfields, Flower and Dean Street told a different story. Criminals, drunks, and desperate women packed its narrow alleys. Screams in the night were so routine that neighbors stopped looking up. Women sold themselves in the dark for a few coins, just enough to buy a bed for one night. And somewhere in those shadows, a well-dressed man walked quietly. He accepted their services. Then, he carved them open. His name, Jack the Ripper. Hello guys, welcome back to the channel and welcome to today's case, the mystery of Jack the Ripper. Dozens of murders between 1888 and 1892 have been linked to his name, but police were only certain of 5. All 5 occurred in 1888. All 5 victims were believed to be sex workers. Women the killer seemed to view as a stain on the streets of Whitechapel, to be cleaned away one body at a time. To understand how this was possible, you have to understand what Whitechapel had become. Starting in the mid-1800s, Irish immigrants poured into London's major cities. Then, beginning in 1882, Jewish immigrants followed, fleeing the Russian Empire, which had made targeting Jewish civilians something close to policy. The population of Whitechapel swelled to 80,000 by 1888. That many people. Not nearly enough work. Around 55% of children born in the East End died before reaching age 5. Crime, violence, theft, and alcoholism were not exceptions. They were the daily rhythm of life. Women trapped in poverty had few options. Many sold themselves on the streets to men with money. Demand was high enough that entrepreneurs built around it. By October 1888, at least 62 brothels operated in Whitechapel, employing an estimated 1,200 women. Even basic shelter was a luxury. A coffin bed, literally a box measuring 1 by 2 meters, where a person slept like a corpse, cost 4 penny bits per night. Roughly a third of a laborer's daily wage. For those who couldn't afford even that, 2 penny bits bought a spot sleeping upright, held in place by a rope strung across the room. Between 1886 and 1889, social tensions sharpened further. Protests, police interventions, racial hostility toward immigrants. Whitechapel had become what newspapers called a den of sin, a wound on the city that proper London preferred not to look at. This was the world Jack the Ripper chose as his hunting ground. From April 3rd, 1888 through February 13th, 1891, 11 murders were grouped under the name the Whitechapel Murders. Police, overwhelmed by the volume of violence against women in the area, couldn't determine exactly how many belonged to one killer. From those 11, only 5 are widely accepted as Jack the Ripper's work, linked by method and the condition of the bodies. The first was Mary Ann Nichols, born Mary Ann Walker on August 26, 1845. She took the surname Nichols after marrying William Nichols on January 16, 1864. The marriage didn't last. According to William, her drinking made life unlivable. He divorced her, but continued paying 5 shillings a week until he learned she was surviving through prostitution and stopped. Mary Ann had tried to do better. She worked as a domestic servant and even wrote her father a letter describing a large, comfortable house and a promising situation. 3 months later, she had fled that position and stolen clothing worth £3 sterling. By 1888, She was sharing a bed in a lodging house on Thrall Street with a woman named Emily Holland. She later moved to 56 Flower and Dean Street, the decision that set the opening scene of Jack the Ripper's story. On the night of August 30th, Mary Ann spent hours at the Frying Pan Pub. She left just after 12:30 a.m. on August 31st. When she returned to her lodging house, she was told she owed 4 penny bits for the night. Rather than pay, she walked back out into the dark to earn it. Emily Holland saw her at around 2:30 a.m. on Osborne Street. Mary Ann was drunk. She kept walking. At approximately 3:40 a.m., a cart driver named Charles Allen Cross was heading to work when something near the gate of a property on Bucks Row stopped him. It looked at first glance like a tarpaulin lying on the ground. When he got closer, he saw a woman. Her left hand was gripping the gate. Another driver, Robert Paul, was passing by the same route. Cross called to him. Both men were running late for work. They agreed to find the nearest police officer rather than stay. Constable Jonas Muzen arrived at the scene and met John Neal, another officer who had been patrolling nearby. Before Muzen arrived, Neal had already sent Constable John Thane to fetch Dr. Llewellyn after noticing a deep cut across the victim's throat. The doctor estimated she had been dead for no more than 30 minutes. Mary Ann Nichols, the first confirmed victim. Police began hearing from local sex workers about a figure they called Leather Apron, a man known for extorting women, threatening to skin them if they didn't pay. He was added to the list of persons of interest. Before he could be found, the killer struck again. Annie Chapman was born Eliza Ann Smith on September 25, 1840. She was known as intelligent and sociable, but according to her brother Fountain, she had one weakness she could never shake: rum. She married John James Chapman on May 1st, 1869, at All Saints Church. They moved around West London together until the death of their first child, Emily Ruth, from meningitis, sent both of them spiraling into alcohol. They divorced in 1884. John was required to pay Annie 10 shillings a week. He stopped in 1886 when illness prevented him from working. He died on Christmas Day that year. By May 1888, Annie was staying at Crossingham Lodging House, paying 8 penny bits for a double bed. On the night of September 8th, she needed money for the night's rent. A night watchman named John Evans said Annie was last seen walking in the direction of Spitalfields Market. A witness named Mrs. Elizabeth Long reported seeing Annie being led by a man toward the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street at around 5:30 a.m. She described the man as slightly taller than Annie, around 40 years old, dark-haired, well-dressed, but slightly disheveled. A tenant at the neighboring property, Albert Kadosh, was in his backyard at the time. He heard a woman scream, followed by the sound of something hitting the fence between the two properties. At 6 a.m., a resident named John Davis found Annie's body near the back door, throat cut, abdomen mutilated. Shortly after, Sergeant William Thick arrested John Pizer, the man known as Leather Apron. But Pizer produced a solid alibi. He was eliminated. Frustrated by the pace of the investigation, local business owners formed the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee on September 10th, chaired by George Lusk. They pooled £50 sterling as reward money for information on the killer. For a moment, it seemed to work. The streets felt slightly safer under increased patrols. That sense of relief lasted until the end of September. Elizabeth Stride was born Elizabeth Gustafsdotter in Sweden on November 27, 1843. She spent 6 years working various jobs in Gothenburg before moving to London in February 1866, funded by an inheritance from her mother. She married John Thomas Stride on March 7, 1869. They ran a coffee shop in Poplar, supplemented by his carpentry work. The shop failed in 1875. The marriage ended in 1877. John died of tuberculosis on October 24, 1884. After that, Elizabeth lived in lodging houses near Flower and Dean Street, supported by charity from the Church of Sweden. She also worked as a seamstress and domestic assistant, and for 3 years maintained a turbulent relationship with a man named Michael Kidney. A fight on September 26, 1888, sent her to a different lodging house at 32 Flower and Dean Street. The day before her death, she cleaned 2 rooms at the lodging house for 6 penny bits. That evening, she went to the Queen's Head pub with the house manager, Elizabeth Tanner. By midnight, she was working the streets. Multiple witnesses placed her at various points through the night, each time with a different man. At 12:35 a.m., Constable William Smith saw her with a man carrying a long parcel, approximately 45 centimeters. At 1 a.m., Louis Diemschultz was returning to the International Working Men's Educational Club by horse and cart, when his horse shied suddenly to the left. He lit a match. On the ground lay Elizabeth Stride, blood still flowing fresh from a cut across her neck. Many investigators believe the killer was interrupted by the arriving cart. Whatever happened, he wasn't done. Catherine Eddowes was born April 14, 1842 in Graiseley Green, the 6th of 12 children. Both parents died when she was 15. She drifted between Wolverhampton and Birmingham, picking up and losing jobs. In Birmingham, she met a former soldier named Thomas Conway. Though they never officially married, she used the name Kate Conway and tattooed his initials on her left arm. Alcohol ended that relationship too, around 1880. She moved to East End London with a fruit seller named John Kelly, whom she met at a lodging house on Flower and Dean Street in 1881. Each summer, they traveled to the village of Hunton to pick hops for extra income. On September 27, 1888, they returned, having spent everything they earned. Eddowes planned to visit her daughter in Southwark on September 29th to borrow money. She never made it there. Instead, she was found unconscious on the street at 8:30 p.m., drunk. Police Constable Louis Frederick Robinson took her to the station. She was released in the early hours of September 30th. When she left the station, she should have turned right toward Flower and Dean Street. She turned left toward Aldgate. 3 witnesses, Joseph Lawenda, Joseph Hyam Levy, and Harry Harris, saw her pass through Church Passage at around 1:35 a.m. with a man who appeared to be a sailor. At 1:44 a.m., Constable Edward Watkins found her body in the southwest corner of Mitre Square, throat cut, abdomen mutilated, intestines exposed. The only physical clue was found near Goulston Street, a piece of Eddowes' bloody apron. Next to it, written in white chalk on the wall, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Metropolitan Police and City of London Police argued over what to do with it. The decision was made to erase it before dawn, before it could spark attacks on Jewish residents. On September 27th, the Central News Agency had received a letter signed Jack the Ripper, widely assumed to be a hoax. Police dismissed it. but the letter had promised to cut off the ear of the next victim. When Eddowes was found, her right ear was missing. The alias spread through the press. The name stuck. A second letter arrived, this one addressed directly to George Lusk at the Vigilance Committee. Inside the package, alongside a letter written in red and signed "From Hell," was half a preserved human kidney. The writer claimed it came from Eddowes. He said he had fried and eaten the other half and dared Lusk to catch him. Analysis confirmed the kidney was human. Eddowes' left kidney was indeed missing. Most investigators believe it was the work of a medical student with a dark sense of humor. But no one knew for certain. The fifth victim is the most disturbing, not just for what happened to her, but for how much time the killer had. Almost nothing is documented about Mary Jane Kelly's early life. What is known comes almost entirely from a man named Joseph Barnett, who shared her lodgings. According to Barnett, Kelly was born in Limerick, Ireland, around 1863. She married a miner named Davis at 16. He died in a mining explosion 2 or 3 years later. She moved to Cardiff to live with a cousin. It is believed this is where she first turned to prostitution. By 1884, she had moved to London and secured work at an upscale brothel, serving wealthy clients. Those who knew her described her as attractive and full-figured. One client, Frances Craig, took her to France. She returned within 2 weeks. On April 8, 1887, Barnett met Kelly on Commercial Street. They agreed to live together the next day. By February 1888, they had settled at 13 Miller's Court. Neighbors knew her as a drunk who sang Irish songs and caused trouble when intoxicated. They called her Dark Mary. When Barnett lost his job, Kelly returned to street work. When one of her friends, another sex worker, caused problems between them, Barnett moved out. He still visited occasionally and sometimes gave her money. On the night of November 9th, Kelly approached a man named George Hutchinson around 2 a.m., asking to borrow 6 penny bits. Hutchinson had none. He watched her walk toward Thrall Street, where a man around 35 years old stopped her. The man was dressed expensively, unusual for the area. He seemed aware of being watched and kept pulling his hat low over his face. Hutchinson watched them enter Miller's Court together at around 2:45 a.m. Neighbors reported nothing unusual through the rest of the night. No noise, no lights. One woman said she heard a voice call out, "Murder!" But in Flower and Dean Street, that wasn't unusual enough to act on. The next morning, a man named Thomas Bowyer arrived at Kelly's door to collect overdue rent. 29 shillings. No answer. The door was locked. There was a hole in the window pane, covered with a cloth. Bowyer pushed the cloth aside and looked through. His military training had not prepared him for what he saw inside. Mary Jane Kelly lay on the bed. What had once been a woman was barely recognizable. The investigation that followed was one of the largest in London's history at that point. Over 2,000 people were interviewed. More than 300 were examined. 80 were detained. A £500 reward was offered. Most of the original case files were destroyed during German bombing raids in World War II. The killer's precision attracted suspicion toward butchers, slaughterers, and surgeons. 76 were questioned. All produced strong alibis. Police surgeon Thomas Bond issued a profile based on all 5 autopsies, noting that the same hand was responsible for each killing, that victims' throats were cut first, and that the bodies showed evidence of the killer positioning them after death to minimize blood scatter. Several suspects have been named over the decades: Søren Klosowski, a Polish immigrant who arrived in England just before the murders began, was the primary suspect of Inspector Frederick Aberline. After the killings, Kosminski changed his name to George Chapman, married 3 women, and poisoned all 3. He was hanged in 1903. Police Commissioner Sir Melville Macnaghten favored Montague John Druitt, a Dorset lawyer who was dismissed from his teaching post and found floating in the Thames on December 31st, 1888, weeks after the final killing. But records show Druitt was playing cricket in Dorset on September 1st, the day after the first canonical murder. Francis Tumblady's name was dragged into the Jack the Ripper case, thanks to his alleged collection of uteruses from women of various social and economic backgrounds, according to the accounts of several of his acquaintances. Before moving to London, Tumblety had already accumulated a criminal record with police in the United States and Canada, posing as a doctor selling Indian herbal medicines. At least one of Tumblety's patients lost their life due to his unscientific concoctions. Tumblety's presence in London in 1888 only came to light following his arrest on November 7th on charges of same-sex relations, which were illegal under local law at the time. To avoid legal consequences, he fled to France and then continued on to the United States. It did not take long for American police to throw Tumblety behind bars, as he had made quite a name for himself selling health products. Although Scotland Yard informed the New York City police of Tumblety's involvement in the Jack the Ripper case, the NYPD stated there was no concrete evidence linking the doctor to the bloody Whitechapel murders, and that he could not be extradited to London. John Pizer, better known by the nickname Leather Apron, had previously been mentioned by sex workers in the Whitechapel area. This extortionist was known to be brutal, threatening to kill sex workers who did not pay him, and sometimes resorting to physical violence. Pizer's criminal record of stabbings only worsened his public image. He was detained by Police Sergeant William Thick on September 10th, solely on the basis of accusations from sex workers who feared Leather Apron. Pizer was able to present a strong alibi before the court. It was established that Pizer was staying with a relative on the night of Elizabeth's murder. In the case of Annie, Pizer was able to prove that he had been conversing with a police officer while watching a fire display at London docks. Pizer believed he had been detained not based on evidence, but out of hatred. At the very least, he received financial compensation from a newspaper that had accused him of being the murderer of Elizabeth and Annie. One suspect, who is genuinely believed to have been Jack the Ripper, is a man named Aaron Kosminski. This resident of Colney Hatch Lunatic Asylum was believed by Assistant Commissioner Sir Robert Anderson to be the man they were after. Born under the name Aaron Kosminski in Clodawa, Kosminski immigrated to England around 1881. The reason for his relocation likely stemmed from the threatening situation in the Russian Empire, which at the time was suppressing its Jewish population. Upon arriving in London, Kosminski, along with his siblings Wolf and Matilda, chose to settle in Whitechapel, where many Jewish immigrants resided. This Polish man was known to work as a hairdresser, though not consistently, and was more often financially supported by his siblings. Kosminski's mental health began to deteriorate from 1885. He would at times hallucinate, hearing voices that others could not hear, became paranoid when fed, and refused to bathe. On July 12, 1890, Kosminski was admitted to the Mile End Old Town Workhouse due to the worsening of his mental disorder. His condition continued to deteriorate, and he was eventually committed to Colney Hatch Lunatic Asylum beginning February 7th of the same year. In his report, Anderson described his view of Kosminski, characterizing the Polish Jewish man as someone with dangerous sexual obsessions. His proximity of residence to the victims made it easier for him to carry out criminal acts. Only one man had successfully identified the perpetrator, but was unwilling to come forward. This decision was not without reason. The witness himself was of Polish Jewish descent, and it was noted that they consistently protected one another, regardless of the circumstances. Kosminski died in March 1919, weighing only 44 kilograms. During his time as a patient at the asylum, he was generally considered non-dangerous, although he was reported to have once threatened his sister Matilda with a knife. He also threw a chair at a staff member at the asylum in January 1892. Those were the two most serious incidents on record. One important point regarding Kosminski's tendencies was his habit of speaking in Yiddish, a Germanic language written in Hebrew script, indicating his limited ability to communicate in English. Jack the Ripper, on the other hand, was capable of persuading victims into dark alleyways without difficulty. In 2014, DNA testing on a blood-stained shawl belonging to Edau's, purchased by author Russell Edwards, showed a match with Kosminski's DNA. The test was conducted by DNA analysis expert Jari Luhalainen at Edwards' request. The comparative DNA source was claimed to come from none other than the descendants of Kosminski's sister, with a match rate of 99.2% in the first test and 100% in the second. However, many parties questioned this evidence. The issue was seen to lie in the authenticity of Edau's blood-stained shawl, which was claimed to have been found at the scene where Edau's body was discovered, and passed down through the descendants of Amos Simpson, a Metropolitan Police officer. Yet the officer who first found the body was not Simpson, but Edward Watkins. Simpson was also stationed in Cheshunt, far from the scene of the crime. According to former police officer Donald Rumbelow, they had already cataloged all the belongings and clothing of the victim at the scene, and none of the items resembled a shawl. Even if the item did exist as Russell claimed, over the span of hundreds of years, the shawl would undoubtedly have been handled by many people, contaminating the DNA samples on the piece of evidence. To this day, experts continue to debate who Jack the Ripper truly was, the killer who claimed the lives of women living below London's economic poverty line. Most of the police investigation documents from that era, which could have been tremendously helpful in a modern investigation, were lost in the tide of World War II. Yet, like two sides of a coin, the massacre at the time brought about sweeping changes in the East End, aided by pressure from the surrounding community. 2 decades later, the slums were cleared. The troubled street of Flower and Dean Street was replaced by new buildings. Several old streets and surviving structures have since been used by local tour guides as a source of income, recounting the bloody events of 1888. Jack the Ripper has been immortalized in the minds of Londoners as a boogeyman for misbehaving children, and as a horror story about aristocratic exploitation for adults. So, what do you think? Do you believe that Kosminski was the perpetrator? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments section below. Don't forget to hit like if you enjoy our content. And of course, thank you so much to all of you who have watched this video. And see you guys in the next video.